Plustax Entertainment presents Corazón del Crimen, a gripping tale of power, greed, and loyalty in the heart of New York City's underworld. Written by Troy Bello the Prophet and narrated by 11 Labs, this audiobook takes you on a thrilling journey through the dangerous and complex world of drug lords and their struggles for control. Buckle up and get ready for a wild ride as we dive into the lives of our colorful cast of characters and discover who will emerge as the king of the city.
Get ready for an explosive tale of power, betrayal, and ambition in the heart of the criminal underworld. Set in the diverse world of Spanish-speaking gangs in New York City, Corazón del Crimen follows the journeys of key players as they navigate a dangerous game of dominance and survival. From the ruthless drug lord Carlito Nene to the cunning General Roberti and the unexpected hero Sister Francis, this gripping story will keep you on the edge of your seat with every twist and turn. Who will come out on top and be crowned the King of New York? Find out in Corazón del Crimen, a thrilling saga of crime and redemption.
Chapter 1: Rise of the Kings. The city of New York was buzzing with excitement as rumors spread of a new power struggle between three of the most notorious names in the drug industry: Carlito Nene, the Bronx-born gangster; Sonia Escobar, the heiress to the Escobar throne; and a mysterious figure known only as Bello, were all vying for control of the Big Apple. With their fingers in multiple lines of revenue, both legal and illegal, they had become the most powerful players in the city. But their rivalry was about to reach new heights, with each determined to claim the throne and cement their legacy. As tensions between the three rose, their respective territories became battlegrounds. Brooklyn, once a hotbed for Escobar's legal marijuana enterprise, was now being infiltrated by Nene's gang, led by his loyal lieutenant, Marco Loco. Meanwhile, the Staten Island and Coney Island areas became pawns in the power struggle. The city was on the brink of chaos, with the fate of its drug industry hanging in the balance. Carlito Nene was a streetwise hustler who had risen through the ranks of the drug trade to become a kingpin in his own right. He had built his empire from scratch, starting out as a small-time dealer and working his way up the ladder. He was a cunning strategist who knew how to manipulate the system to his advantage. Sonia Escobar was the daughter of a legendary drug lord, and she had inherited her father's business acumen and ambition. She had built her legal marijuana enterprise from the ground up, using her family's connections and resources to expand her reach. But she was not content to stop there. She had her sights set on the rest of the drug trade, and she was determined to become the most powerful player in the game. Bello, on the other hand, was a complete enigma. No one knew his true identity or his origins, but rumors abounded about his incredible wealth and power. Some whispered that he was a retired cartel boss, while others believed he was a foreign investor with deep pockets. Whatever the case may be, one thing was clear: he was a force to be reckoned with. As the war for the throne escalated, the murder rate in New York began to climb. The three factions were all vying for control, and they were willing to do whatever it took to win. Innocent bystanders were caught in the crossfire, and the city was plunged into a state of fear and uncertainty. Chapter 3: Worship Me. The alley was dark, and the only light came from a flickering street lamp overhead. Carlito Nene stood over the battered body of Jeffrey, one of the mayor's son's Wall Street buddies. His mouth was leaking with blood, and his face was a mass of bruises. Carlito Nene's goons had him pinned down on the ground, and he was barely able to speak. "I've given you so many chances to do right, Jeff. Why won't you do right?" Carlito Nene's voice was cold and menacing. Jeffrey tried to respond, but he choked on his own teeth as they slipped out of his mouth with a spray of blood. Carlito Nene leaned closer. Take it easy. I'm not going to kill you. Just make sure your daddy calls me. I've been calling him all day and he won't answer my calls. Let him know I only let you owe me this money because of our friendship. But when he doesn't answer my calls, it makes me feel like we're not friends. And if we're not friends, that means you're dead." Carlito Nene's goons dragged Jeffrey and threw him into a waiting cab. The driver was paid $300 and given strict instructions. "Don't bring him home. Bring him to my spot upstate. Get my hose to patch him up. Give him 3 days and then you bring him home. Take away his cell phone. I'll contact your dad and let him know you're safe." The cab driver drove away with Jeffrey badly injured in the back seat. Carlito Nene turned to his goons. "Follow me. Make sure you guys keep an eye on this guy. I've got a lot riding on this pony here." The men jumped into a brand new 2021 Porsche SUV. It was black and sleek, with tinted windows and chrome rims. By the looks of it, Nene's goons were eating pretty good. The thing about Carlito Nene was that even though he had his hands in all the big plates in New York, he still wanted every crumb. He wanted a piece of everything. This greedy ass wanted the paperboys to give him a piece of their money. He didn't care. He'd go to the church, and he'd want the damn confession plate. And that brought us to a story flashback. Carlito Nene was a young kid when he started his string of robberies. He was known for the unspeakable. He and his goons would go into the churches, the masses, anywhere. Buddhist temples, it didn't matter. And they'd rob everything. His reason behind it wasn't that there was that much money in these places of worship. But he was such a crazy Chico. He wanted them to worship him, and he thought he was a god. He was delusional. Carlito Nene was a maniac, and if not stopped, in my opinion, he would kill everybody in the end. Chapter 4. The Fingers' Calculated Sacrifice. As the high-stakes poker game continued in Vegas, Fingers, a.k.a. Marco Loco, the famous jewelry thief, was surrounded by beautiful women and young men who admired him. He was missing 2 fingers, and people often wondered how that happened. Let's rewind to 15 years ago when Marco came to Las Vegas and did everything he could to climb up the ranks quickly. One summer night, Marco found himself in the company of millionaires and a billionaire. The stakes were so high that it wasn't just about money. The men had millions and billions of dollars, and the price was fingers. Marcos had his sights set on a rare African diamond worth $500 million that the billionaire owned. The diamond was kept off the records and in the black markets for over 100 years. The person who owned it also had other amazing treasures from the beginning of time, including the real Mona Lisa and a jar of honey that came out of one of the Egyptian tombs. Knowing that the billionaire had an entire hospital wing with the finest doctors, Marco decided to sacrifice 2 of his fingers to get stitched up in the man's house. He lost on purpose, even though he had the winning hand, to make it look real. 1 finger wasn't enough. These were big boy, bad boy killers, and he had to make it worth their while. After losing 2 fingers and throwing up on the side of the poker table, Marco asked the man to have him stitched up to stop the bleeding because the fingers were the prize at this point. As Marco was escorted to the nurses and wrapped up, he slipped out of the room, telling them that he wanted to feel the pain and not be drugged. After the surgery, the nurses left the room, and Marco went upstairs like the cat burglar he was and cracked the safe. He usually took about 5 minutes to open the safe, but without the 2 fingers, he could feel inside of them. The safe became an extension of his hand, and he popped it open with the greatest of ease in just 2.2 minutes flat. Marco had already spent $1 million to buy a high-powered bomb, which he used to replace the diamond in the safe. The next time the billionaire opened the safe, it was over. The bomb went off, and the man's billion-dollar mansion exploded and set on fire, setting everyone inside ablaze. Marco had his goons case the entire place and pour gasoline. The police suspected foul play, but no one could be proven to have done it. Meanwhile, all the gangsters in the city raided the man's house while it was on fire because it was known that he had so many treasures. People were on fire, running out with artifacts, and one man claimed to have a bone from Moses. We return to the present, where Marco is playing poker when he receives a call from his old friend from New York, Carlito Nene. Carlito needs Marco's help and asks him to go to his upstate stash house to discuss a big-time gig for a lot of money. Marco has super respect for Carlito, knowing that he is a crazy maniac. They spent time up the road when Marco was called Loco, and Carlito was called Big Bubba. But that's a whole other story.
Chapter Black. The War Rages. On the CNN reporter's voice echoed through the TV screen as he reported on the recent triple homicide, a clear sign of the dangerous gangs that roamed the streets of New York. Carlito Nene's Bronx-based gang was once again in the spotlight, their criminal activities causing fear and terror among politicians, police officers, and prisoners alike. But Nene wasn't the only player in the game. Sonia Escobar's drug empire was expanding, and her ruthless tactics were causing just as much chaos and destruction. The gang war between the Nenes and the Escobars had reached new heights, and the entire city was on edge. Old gangsters from the Bronx were being dredged up from the past, their names spoken in hushed tones as their legacies were examined in the context of the current power struggle. The likes of Nicky Barnes, Frank Lucas, and even Al Capone were being mentioned, their ghosts looming over the city like a warning of what could happen if the violence continued. As the CNN reporter continued his report, the scene shifted to a lavish dinner being held in an elegant room, complete with chandeliers and 7 butlers. Sonia Escobar and her sister Nancy sat at the table, their faces placid as they listened to the mayor's promises. But beneath the surface, Sonia seethed with anger, knowing that the only reason the mayor was even talking to her was because of the dirt they had on him. Nancy, on the other hand, seemed to revel in their power, playing with the mayor's hair and whispering threats in his ear. The food on the table was a feast for the senses, with steaming plates of lobster, succulent prime rib, and sides of truffle mashed potatoes and roasted asparagus. The glasses were filled with the finest wines, and even the silverware gleamed in the soft light of the chandeliers. But the tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with the unspoken threat of violence. As the mayor excused himself from the table, the women smiled and saw him out, but the sense of danger lingered. It was clear that the war between the Nenes and the Escobars was far from over, and innocent lives would continue to be caught in the crossfire. The chapter ends with the realization that the city was no longer safe, and the people of New York could only hope that the officials and authorities would find a way to put an end to the violence before it was too late.
Chapter 5. The Power of Friendship. As Sister Frances enters the packed church, she takes in the diverse crowd gathered to praise God. She notices a few homeless individuals among the sea of expensive cars and finely dressed attendees, but everyone seems to be getting along. Sister Frances takes her place at the podium and begins to deliver a powerful sermon, drawing on her reputation as a renowned preacher who travels the world spreading the word of God. After the service, Sister Frances approaches the attending mayor, who looks visibly worried. He confides in her that he hasn't seen the missing boy, but has received word from Carlito that he's safe. Sister Frances offers him some words of comfort, but she can tell that something else is troubling him. As the mayor heads out of the church, he spots a brand new Bentley parked across the street. He approaches the car and takes a closer look, noticing that the window is rolled down and Carlito Nene is sitting in the back seat smoking a cigar. The sight of Carlito strikes fear into the mayor's heart, and he breaks down in tears on the pavement. But how did Sister Frances come to be friends with the wealthy and influential Sonia Escobar? Growing up in Guatemala, Sister Frances and Sonia were childhood friends, despite coming from vastly different backgrounds. Sonia's family was one of the wealthiest and most powerful in the country, while Sister Frances came from a more modest background. When Sister Frances immigrated to the United States, she stayed with the Escobar family in New York City, who welcomed her with open arms. Despite hearing rumors about Sonia's involvement in illegal activities, Sister Frances never saw any evidence of this behavior and continued their friendship. As adults, Sonia continued to keep Sister Frances clear of any potential trouble and danger. Even though Sonia was connected to some of the most powerful and dangerous people in the city, she always made sure that Sister Frances was safe and protected. The power of their friendship is evident in the way Sonia looks out for Sister Frances, and the way Sister Frances trusts and relies on her friend. It's a bond that has lasted for years and has withstood even the most difficult of circumstances. But now, as the mayor looks up at the Bentley and sees Carlito Nene sitting inside, he realizes that even the power of friendship might not be enough to keep him safe from the dangers lurking in the city. Chapter 6. General Roberti's Reign in Honduras and a Meeting with Sonia Escobar. As General Roberti steps out of the plane, he's met by a flurry of activity. High-ranking officials and military personnel rush to greet him, welcoming him back to the United States. The luxurious and expensive jumbo jet he arrived on stands tall in the background, an impressive feat of engineering and design. As he settles into his bulletproof limo, General Roberti's mind wanders back to his childhood in Honduras. He remembers his father, a former El Jefe, grooming him to become a soldier from a young age. He trained vigorously, honing his skills in combat and strategy, and soon found himself taking over the reins of his father's empire. But General Roberti's reign was a bloody one. He was ruthless in his pursuit of power, eliminating anyone who dared to stand in his way. And yet, despite the violence and bloodshed, the people of Honduras adored him. He was a hero to them, the man who brought order to a chaotic land. As his limo makes its way through the crowded streets of New York, General Roberti's phone rings. It's Sonia Escobar, his old lover and friend, demanding to speak with him immediately. He can hear the annoyance in her voice as she chides his secretary for interrupting their call. General Roberti obligingly pulls over to the side of the road, telling his secretary to get out of the car. He knows that Sonia is a dangerous woman, with spies and informants lurking around every corner. He can't afford to make her angry or upset, not when she has so much power and influence. They make plans to meet up for dinner, and Sonia insists on only the best of everything. The world of high-end restaurants and chefs, she expects the most exclusive and luxurious establishments in New York City. The woman tasked with booking the restaurant knows that failure is not an option. If she doesn't make the night perfect, she knows that she'll be a dead woman. General Roberti and Sonia say goodbye, with promises to see each other soon. As he drives away, General Roberti can't help but feel a sense of unease. He knows that Sonia is a woman to be reckoned with, and he wonders what she has planned for him in the future.
Chapter 7. Fingers and the Night at the Hard Rock Cafe. Carlito Nene had summoned Fingers from Las Vegas, but Fingers couldn't resist one last night of gambling before heading to New York. He was a compulsive gambler, but a successful one at that. He always seemed to win, and tonight was no exception. Fingers and his goons had a great time at the casino, and after a few hours, Fingers decided to head to the airport. But as he was leaving, he bumped into two members of Metallica at the Hard Rock Cafe in Hollywood, Florida. They had VIP tickets for the upcoming Wu-Tang and Nas show and offered to bring Fingers and his crew along. Fingers was hesitant at first, knowing he had to get to New York, but the chance to see the Wu-Tang Clan and Nas while hanging out with Metallica was too good to pass up. He recalculated his schedule and realized he had plenty of time, so he agreed to join them. The night at the Hard Rock Cafe was a blast. The Wicked Molly, a popular cover band, played their hearts out, and Fingers and his crew enjoyed the music and the company of the beautiful and sexy servers. As the night went on, the excitement built for the main event, the Wu-Tang Clan and Nas show. Fingers and his goons were thrilled to be there, and the energy in the crowd was electric. It was a night they would never forget. But as the show ended and they walked out of the Hard Rock Cafe, Fingers knew it was time to get back to business. He had a job to do, and Carlito Nene was waiting for him in New York. Fingers said goodbye to his new friends and headed to the airport, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8. Señor Jaime's Mi Dominicocito. Baby Señor Jaime was a big-time reggaeton artist on the come-up from the barrios of Mexico. He was a super thug who commanded respect for all the work he put in, both in the music industry and on the streets. They say he even extorted Bad Bunny for a feature on his new song, Dominicocito Baby, which was blowing up all over the United States and Mexico. As Señor Jaime sat at a slot machine in the Hard Rock Casino, surrounded by about 20 different women, all vying for his attention, he spotted Fingers. He wondered what this dude was doing on his turf. Señor Jaime knew Fingers from when he was out in Las Vegas doing shows on the come-up. He knew that Fingers' gambling really was cover-up for all the dope they'd been slinging. Fingers was in deep with people in the cartel who had Mexico on lock, and Señor Jaime was in a comfy position because he worked for them, too. He called Sonia Escobar as soon as he saw Fingers. She answered, "Señor Jaime, what's up?" "I see Fingers in the club. He's sitting at a machine with about 20 different women all surrounding around him. What the fuck is he doing in Florida? Nobody told me he'd be laying here. Is this some bullshit?" Señor Jaime said. "No, it's not. I need you to deal with that for me, honey. You say you love me. You need to show me that you love me," she replied, Mi Dominicocito Baby using the chorus of his new song against him. Had always loved Sonia Escobar. He had never found a woman on her level, and even with all the money he could have, he knew he could never have her. But he still tried, and anything Sonia asked for, Sonia got. "Okay, let me get off this phone so I can catch up to this guy," Senor Jaime said. "I know you won't let me down, baby. I'll call you later," she said. "Yes, we'll have dinner when you get into New York. Just take care of that for me," she added, before hanging up. Senor Jaime almost cursed himself out because, even though he wanted the attention for giving her the heads up, now he had to put a hit out on Fingers. To be honest, Fingers was pretty cool with him the last time he saw him in the club. Fingers bought 50 bottles just to show the gang respect. They ended up chilling all night, going to the strip club and hanging out for a couple of days. It's not like they weren't familiar with each other, but Fingers didn't see Senor Jaime being surrounded by all these women. These girls were built like Amazonians, and Senor Jaime had to give props to Dr. Miami for doing a fine job. Senor Jaime had people around him, so it wouldn't be hard to catch back up with Fingers, especially when they knew he was headed to the airport. But this hit was serious. Sonia Escobar had made that clear. Fingers could not make it to that airport alive. As Senor Jaime plotted his next move, he couldn't help but wonder if he was doing the right thing. After all, Fingers had been cool with him before, but he knew that in this game, loyalty was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had to, if he had plans to survive this game as ruthless, and not just any punk-ass bitch could jump in this shit and really hold down the set when it's time to put in work. Senor Jaime was known for spending the block. He keep the Glock cocked 2 in the face, pop pop. And those were actually the new lyrics for his remix that he was going to do with Puff Daddy. The game was crazy, and about to get even crazier. Chapter 9. Carlito Nene's Psychopathic Tendencies. The scene opens in a dimly lit basement somewhere in the Bronx. The sound of LL Cool J's "I'm Bad" fills the air, and the smell of marijuana wafts through the room. Carlito Nene stands in front of a tied-up and gagged man, holding 2 sharp kitchen knives in his hands. He wears nothing but an apron and a chef hat. As LL Cool J's song reaches its climax, Carlito Nene begins to slice and dice the man in front of him. He moves with the precision of a chef, slicing the man into thin strips without killing him. The man writhes in agony, but Carlito Nene seems to revel in his suffering. After a few minutes, Carlito Nene steps back and admires his handiwork. The man is still alive, but barely. He's been sliced into a million paper-thin pieces, just like a chef would do. Carlito Nene grins psychotically at his audience, who have been watching the whole time. He takes off his apron and hops into a shower that's located in the basement. As the water washes away the blood from his hands and body, he feels a sense of satisfaction. He's shown everyone in the room just how skilled he is as a chef, and just how twisted his mind can be. The scene ends with Carlito Nene stepping out of the shower, still grinning psychotically. It's clear that this is just the beginning of his twisted journey, and that he's willing to do whatever it takes to get what he wants.
Chapter Y. Poisoned Pastries and Lethal Cakes. Sonia and her sister sat in the mansion's office, sipping wine as they calmly plotted their next hits. They had a small gang coming up in Flatbush, and they wanted to stomp them out. They had people on their payroll who were heavy-duty and ready to terminate any competition. But their attention turned to another target, the baker, an American woman known in New York for her viral desserts. Lines around her bakery stretched for days, and she was a regular on the Food Network. The hidden secret behind Miss Nicole was that she was in cahoots with General Roberti, who had used the cakes on some of his enemies in past wars. All the gangsters were affiliated with Miss Nicole and her poison bakery. Nicole had over 100 bodies on her conscience. She added certain chemicals to pastries, which caused the Marvel to bring home special cakes when they found out that their partners had committed any form of infidelity. These cakes contained a deadly poison that was hard for medical examiners to detect. Nicole was super smart, and she knew just what to add to the pastries to make them lethal. Sonia and her sister had a history with the baker. They had a dispute over 15 years ago, but Sonia's rage was unimaginable. She wanted to order a wedding cake from her and sponsor her wedding, but the real plan was to get the baker to make a poison wedding cake that would kill the bride and groom, hopefully weeks after indulging in it. Maybe the rest of the guests would get a little sick, but they would survive. It would take at least 10 doses to complete the psychopathic ritual of eating cake till you die. As Sonia hung up with the baker, she and her sister sat there, looking at each other. They knew that Nicole was loyal to General Roberti and would inform him that Sonia had tried to get a cake made as part of her plan to kill Carlo Nene's right-hand man's wife and his underboss. This was a blatant attempt to ridicule Carlo Nene because Sonia and her sister knew that Nicole would definitely not fulfill the agreement and deliver the cake. But it was just to let General Roberti know that she knew all his secrets, even about the poison pastries. Chapter 10. Sister Frances and Carlito Nene. Sister Frances was out on the streets of New York, giving away meals to the homeless, one of her many acts of kindness that she did for the city, funded by her foundations and backed by the good people of New York. Just seeing her was enough to bring a smile to your face, as she was the greatest representation of a good person, something people often missed in New York City. Sister Frances was genuinely a great person who was building a name for herself. Her name was almost getting as big as the gangsters, because for every bad thing one of them did, she did 2 good things to try to counter it. But the sad truth was that she would never be king. Neither did she want to be. The only problem was who would be king. As Sister Frances talked to a few of the people that came to get food, she saw an old, familiar face walking down the street, surrounded by some rough-looking men, to say the least. It was Carlito Nene, dressed to impress as usual, if he wasn't naked, of course, with a bloody apron on. He was out in the street making his rounds early in the morning while Sister Frances was handing out food for breakfast. Carlito Nene was taking your lunch money. It's just what it was in New York at that time. But even Carlito Nene was on his best behavior any time he saw Sister Frances. She was the one person he actually had respect for because he knew she really loved God, her family, her children, and her community. He wasn't mad at that at all. He actually felt that without her, it couldn't be him. Carlito Nene believed in a balance. He just felt he was the other side of the coin. So as much good as she was going to do, he was going to do just as much bad. That's what it was in his mind. That's what God created him for. To beat your ass when you're not listening to God. He figured if you ain't doing the right thing, you belong to him because these streets belong to Carlito Nene. And if you want to be separated from that, you need to be in the church. And that was a lie too, because he was known for robbing those. The only church that he never robbed was Sister Frances's church, and she was grateful. She didn't particularly agree with Mr. Nene, as she would call him, but the streets were none of her concerns. The gang wars were none of her concerns. She was only here to help. Sister Frances and Carlito Nene greeted each other politely. "Hello, Sister Frances. How are you doing this good morning? Blessed and highly favored. What about you?" Carlito Nene let Sister Frances know that he was there last service, but there were so many cars and people there he chose to sit in the car and make his prayer to himself. Sister Frances said, "Well, if you ever need my help or want to make confessions, I'll be here for you." They both laughed because Sister Frances definitely didn't want to hear Carlito Nene's confessions. She could only imagine how psychopathic those probably could be, and she really didn't want to know about any murders or anything else. Being that she was a woman of the church, those were confidential things, and she appreciated that Carlito Nene never used his opportunity to confess any murders to her. She wanted nothing to do with that matter. In fact, she was relieved when Carlito Nene left with his gang. Title: The Race to the Airport. As Senior Jaime races towards the airport with 2 shooters and high-powered rifles, Fingers and his entourage are also headed there in a brand-new Tesla. Fingers is on his phone doing online gambling and just won $100,000. He's wondering what Carlito Nene has in store for him when he gets back to New York. Meanwhile, General Roberti is secretly buying buildings in Manhattan under a different company name, including properties in Carlito Nene and Sonia Escobar's neighborhoods. No one knows of his plans yet, but he's slowly tightening his grip on the city. In the Bronx, Carlito Nene is furious and ordering his men to put pressure on Sonia Escobar's territories. He wants war, and the 4th of July weekend seems like the perfect time to shut down her entire drug trade. Sonia, on the other hand, plans to make the streets too dangerous for anyone to buy drugs in the Bronx, and tensions are rising. As the two gang leaders prepare for a showdown, Sister Frances is meeting with the mayor to build a new playground and rec center for underprivileged children in the Bronx and Brooklyn. She's donating $5 million to start construction immediately. With the city on the brink of chaos, the stage is set for the next installment. The listener is left hanging, wondering who will come out on top in the battle for New York. We promise to be back soon with the next chapter in this gripping saga.